They said history began in the deserts of Mesopotamia. But what if the Bible hid a truth so powerful, it could rewrite everything we think we know about humanity's beginning? Buried between the lines of Genesis lies a story the world chose to ignore, a story that connects divine creation, the curse of Ham, and the mysterious lands of Cush and Egypt. For centuries, scholars debated, religions denied, and nations silenced one question: who were the first people touched by God's hand? What if the answer has been right there in the scripture all along, and it points directly to the origin of black people? Stay tuned. What you're about to hear may change how you see the Bible forever, or centuries. Humanity has told its story through broken fragments, cave paintings, clay tablets, and scriptures that survived the fires of empire and time. But what if those fragments were never meant to be separated? What if the truth of our shared beginning lies not in a single book, but in a tapestry woven across civilizations now buried in dust? Long before modern maps, long before history was recorded by kings, there were whispers of a cradle, a land described in sacred texts not merely as a place, but as a point of divine convergence. The book of Genesis speaks of rivers flowing from Eden, dividing into lands of gold and precious stones. Archaeologists called it mythology. But deep in the deserts of Mesopotamia, beneath layers of ancient earth, explorers began to find something else, evidence that these locations weren't symbolic at all. The story begins with an expedition in the late 19th century. A British archaeologist, Dr. Edward Lenton, unearthed clay tablets near the ruins of ancient Ur. Most dismissed them as routine discoveries, yet one fragment stood apart. It spoke of 4 rivers, matching those described in Genesis, and of a 5th, erased from records, leading to a mysterious southern land where the sun kisses the dark earth. The line puzzled scholars. Was it poetry, or a geographical hint lost in translation? Over the next decades, evidence mounted, maps carved in stone, fragments of Sumerian hymns, Egyptian wall reliefs, all hinting at a forgotten region that played a vital role in the earliest stories of mankind. But every time researchers approached this truth, it vanished behind the veil of time and politics. Museums locked the findings, universities called them cultural myths, and yet, the questions never died. In sacred texts across continents, patterns repeated. Ancient people described beings of radiant skin, the first cities rising by great rivers, and knowledge descending from the heavens. The same symbols appeared in temples thousands of miles apart. A winged sun, intertwined serpents, eyes that never close. How could civilizations separated by oceans share the same imagery? Coincidence or memory? As centuries turned, humanity moved forward. Science advanced, faith evolved, but the clues endured. Carvings in Ethiopia mirrored glyphs from Sumer. Egyptian mummies bore traces of minerals found only in faraway lands. Even linguistic scholars began to notice the odd resemblance between early Semitic roots and words found in Proto-African dialects. It was as if someone had scattered a single story into 1,000 pieces, and humanity forgot how to put them together. In 2001, a team of researchers in the Arabian Peninsula made a shocking discovery. Ancient inscriptions matching the Genesis rivers engraved in a cave that predated known biblical manuscripts by centuries. The translation referenced a southern realm where the seed of humanity first took root. Once again, the trail seemed to lead toward the African continent. Not as a narrative of separation, but of unity, of beginnings. But the most baffling find came from beneath the sands of Nubia. Archaeologists uncovered a set of artifacts depicting a celestial tree. Eerily, similar to the biblical tree of life. Beneath it, figures of men and women raised their hands toward the heavens, surrounded by inscriptions no one could fully translate. Some experts called it a mythological coincidence. Others weren't so sure. One night, as the dig lights flickered in the desert wind, lead researcher Dr. Miriam Adekoya wrote in her journal, "Every fragment we find feels less like a discovery and more like a memory returning. Something within these symbols speaks, not to one people, but to all of us." Her words marked a turning point. The mystery wasn't about one race, one nation, or one faith. It was about the origin of awareness itself, the first spark that made humankind look to the stars and ask, "Why are we here?" Across the globe, scientists and theologians found themselves at a crossroads. Carbon dating of artifacts from Nubia, Ethiopia, and Mesopotamia suggested an overlap, as if advanced civilizations had risen and fallen almost simultaneously, connected by trade, faith, or something deeper. The question was no longer whether the Bible was literal or symbolic. The question became, was it recording memory or prophecy? And then came the scroll. Hidden in the archives of a European monastery for over 500 years, a weathered document surfaced during a digitization project. Written in early Greek, it spoke of a garden where 4 rivers sing, and a gate of black earth where life first took breath. It described travelers from the land of the south who brought wisdom, metals, and knowledge of the stars. The passage was dismissed as apocryphal, but when linguists compared its phrasing with fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the alignment was undeniable. Suddenly, the academic world buzzed. The Lost River, the Southern Gate, the Black Earth. Were these symbolic references to fertility and origin, or literal descriptions of the African soil revered by ancient civilizations as sacred ground? As documentaries and online debates flared, one detail remained unexplored. The connection between the erased river and an ancient astronomical alignment found only once every 26,000 years. A cosmic cycle marked in Egyptian, Mayan, and Mesopotamian star maps alike. Could it be that early humanity not only recorded their creation story, but tied it to the stars, embedding a code across cultures that modern science was only beginning to understand? Every clue pointed to one chilling realization. The Bible's early passages may not have been a single story told in isolation, but the surviving fragment of a global language, shared long before borders or nations existed. A language that described not division, but unity. Not myth, but memory. The mystery deepened as researchers noticed that the oldest surviving word for human across multiple ancient languages carried the same root meaning: earth. In Hebrew, Adamah from Adamah, the ground. In Sumerian, Admu, the formed one. In Ge'ez, Adamah, across continents and millennia. The same sound, the same meaning echoed, a linguistic fossil of our forgotten beginning. And yet, for every discovery that drew humanity closer to understanding its shared past, another clue slipped away, stolen, lost, or dismissed as pseudoscience, as if history itself were fighting to keep the secret buried. Now, a new generation of historians and theologians stand on the edge of revelation. They aren't seeking to prove one race's superiority or divine origin. They're searching for what ancient texts and lost artifacts seem to whisper in unison: that humanity's story began not in isolation, but in unity, not in one place, but across a bridge of light, faith, and earth. And as the dust of time settles, the question remains, if the Bible was never meant to divide, but to remind us, then what have we truly forgotten about who we are and where we come from? By the early 21st century, the search for humanity's forgotten chapter had left the dusty archives of libraries and entered a new frontier, the digital age. Thousands of ancient manuscripts, once hidden in monasteries and private collections, were being scanned and uploaded for public access. And as historians and linguists pored over the data, strange connections began to surface, connections that didn't fit neatly into any known timeline. The first breakthrough came not from an archaeologist, but from a data scientist named Leila Navarro. Working at a research lab in Lisbon, she developed an algorithm capable of cross-referencing ancient languages to identify recurring concepts across civilizations. When she ran the program on texts from Sumer, Egypt, and early Hebrew scripture, a startling pattern appeared. Words connected to origin, light, earth, and rivers formed a repeating sequence, a linguistic fingerprint stretching across 5 millennia. Navarro called it the Genesis Code. Her findings suggested that the early stories of creation shared more than poetic similarities. They might have been different translations of a single, much older oral tradition. When overlaid onto ancient trade routes, the geographical distribution of these stories formed a triangular corridor linking Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, and the Horn of Africa. At first, her discovery was dismissed as coincidence, until archaeologists unearthed something extraordinary. In 2015, a French-Ethiopian excavation team working in the Afar Triangle discovered fragments of obsidian tools buried beside human remains estimated to be over 200,000 years old. This wasn't new. The region had long been recognized as one of humanity's earliest habitats. But what caught the researchers' attention was the pattern etched onto a nearby shard of stone. 4 intersecting lines, surrounded by a ring of smaller markings. When enlarged, the image bore an uncanny resemblance to ancient diagrams of Eden's rivers described in Genesis. The markings were too deliberate to be accidental. They were carefully inscribed, and the rock's surface showed evidence of heating, as though it had been treated for preservation. But who could have made it? And why would a people with no written language encode a pattern that resembled a map from a text written tens of thousands of years later? The media called it the Afar Stone. Within weeks, the world's major universities launched competing studies. Some claimed it was coincidence. Others saw it as a bridge between archaeology and theology. Dr. Navarro was invited to the Research Council in Geneva, where she presented a chilling hypothesis. What if the story of creation wasn't revealed once, but remembered? Her proposal suggested that humanity had carried fragments of its own origin through time, encoded in stories, symbols and rituals that later became the foundation of civilization. Soon after, a second clue emerged from a completely different corner of the world. In the arid expanse of northern Sudan, a drone survey revealed a pattern of buried structures stretching across nearly 8 kilometers. Beneath the dunes lay ruins of a forgotten city, predating the known kingdom of Kush. Satellite imagery showed 4 canals converging toward a central plaza. The formation was eerily symmetrical, and once again mirrored the 4 rivers motif. When excavations began, archaeologists uncovered stone pillars inscribed with unfamiliar glyphs. The symbols combined elements of Egyptian, Proto-Sinaitic, and something entirely unknown. Amid the carvings, one line stood out, a sun disk hovering over a field of dark earth, surrounded by the phrase, "The life beneath returns to light." For scholars, it raised an uncomfortable question. How could such diverse languages and cultural motifs converge in a site that should have predated them all? Dr. Miriam Adekoya, who had been studying the Nubian Tree of Life artifact, revisited her notes. The iconography, rivers, roots, celestial discs, all shared the same underlying structure, 4 directions anchored by a center point, symbolizing balance between heaven and earth. The same pattern appeared in Chinese cosmology, Mayan temples, and ancient Hindu mandalas across time and continents. The geometry of creation remained the same. It wasn't proof of a singular religion or civilization, but something deeper, a shared memory embedded in the human psyche. As this realization grew, the mystery began to expand beyond archaeology. Geologists discovered that regions described as Edenic in early texts once shared a connected water system, stretching from the Persian Gulf into parts of northeastern Africa. Paleoclimatic data confirmed that roughly 10,000 years ago, a now-buried river had flowed through what is now the Arabian Desert. It was the missing 5th river, the one mentioned in Dr. Lenton's 19th-century tablet, erased from modern maps. When its dried basin was digitally reconstructed, the river's path aligned perfectly with the ancient inscriptions found in the Nubian desert. The parallels were too precise to ignore, but perhaps the most surprising connection came from above, astronomers. Analyzing ancient temple alignments noticed that many early sacred sites, from Giza to Aksum, shared the same stellar orientation. They all pointed toward a constellation that 20,000 years ago would have risen directly above the equator. This celestial marker, now lost to precession, corresponded to what many ancient cultures called the Eye of Creation. It was as if early civilizations, separated by oceans and time, had once used the stars as coordinates for a shared spiritual geography, a cosmic map guiding humanity back to its source. Yet every answer brought more questions. Why did this knowledge fade? What caused entire cultures to bury or forget the same sacred patterns? In 2018, Dr. Navarro's research team discovered what they believed could be the missing piece, a parchment fragment preserved in salt caves near the Dead Sea. The text, written in Aramaic, spoke of a Book of Dust, an ancient volume said to record the movements of stars, rivers, and the first people who walked in unity before the division. When carbon dated, the parchment was found to be older than most known biblical manuscripts. Its existence reignited debates about how oral histories transformed into scripture, and whether earlier versions might have contained references later edited out. What disturbed Navarro wasn't what the fragment said, but what it implied. If these early stories recorded astronomical events and geological changes, then perhaps Eden was not a garden in the literal sense, but a metaphor for an epoch, a golden age when humanity and nature coexisted in balance before the great migrations began. Her findings reframed the entire discussion. The rivers of Genesis might not be rivers at all, but ancient trade routes or celestial paths, symbolic representations of humanity's dispersion across the earth. Still, deeper mysteries persisted. Throughout these discoveries, a recurring symbol followed researchers like a shadow, the circle within a square, divided by 4 lines. It appeared on the Afar stone, the Sudanese pillars, and even faintly etched on artifacts in Mesopotamian tombs. The geometry matched astronomical charts, showing the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle marking the whole. Earth's slow wobble through the cosmos. Could it be that early humans encoded time itself, using myth to preserve scientific observation? If so, humanity's oldest story wasn't just spiritual, it was astronomical. By 2022, a global research coalition had formed, uniting theologians, historians, and astrophysicists under one project, the Origin Map Initiative. Their mission was simple yet profound: to reconstruct the possible migration, mythological exchange, and cosmic knowledge that shaped humanity's first civilizations. The data pointed to a sobering truth. While cultures varied in their gods and languages, nearly all creation myths began with 3 shared ideas: light emerging from darkness, order rising from chaos, and life formed from earth or dust. Different expressions, but one collective memory. As the research deepened, the tone of the debate began to shift. The project wasn't about proving or disproving religion anymore. It was about rediscovering how deeply connected humanity once was. But beneath this unity lay a darker undercurrent. Several archives containing relevant artifacts had mysteriously gone missing. Private collectors began bidding for ancient maps and untranslated manuscripts. Whispers spread of an organization buying historical material linked to pre-biblical cosmology. To some it was coincidence. To others, deliberate erasure. Then, during a conference in Geneva, Dr. Adekoya presented a chilling slide. A map overlaying the world's ancient river systems with early human migration routes. The lines converged at one point, the exact region where the Afar stone had been found. The hall fell silent, not because the discovery proved anything supernatural, but because it symbolized something profoundly human. No matter where the evidence pointed, it always returned to the same truth: humanity began together. The mystery wasn't who came first, but why we ever believed we were separate. As night fell over the Alps, Dr. Navarro wrote in her research notes, "We are not finding Eden. We are remembering it, the idea that once the world was whole." But the world wasn't ready for that conclusion yet. The deeper the scientists looked, the more resistance they faced. Funding disappeared. Expeditions were delayed. Some accused them of rewriting theology, others of inventing myths. And yet, the clues kept coming. Satellite imagery revealed more buried riverbeds beneath the Sahara, aligning with ancient descriptions of a land once lush and green. DNA mapping confirmed that human lineages once converged in a narrow corridor between East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, precisely where early scriptures described a bridge of creation. The evidence was circumstantial, but hauntingly poetic: a forgotten river, a constellation that no longer rises, a word that means earth in every ancient tongue. Were these coincidences, or echoes of a truth humanity once knew by heart? As the rising action closes, the question no longer belongs to science or scripture alone. It belongs to every human being who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered where the first story began. Because maybe, just maybe, the Bible The stones and the stars are not separate records at all, but chapters of the same book, waiting to be read together again. Wind sweeps across the Nubian desert, carrying the hiss of sand against metal. At the heart of the excavation zone, floodlights reveal a narrow shaft cut into bedrock. For weeks, the scanners had read an impossible anomaly beneath the dunes, an electromagnetic field too stable for natural rock. Dr. Adekoya's team lowers a camera through the opening. What it shows silences the tent above. A vast, symmetrical chamber carved in concentric rings, its walls glimmering with mineral dust. At the center lies a single crystalline sphere, half buried in silt, pulsing faintly in the artificial light. When the researchers descend, instruments spike. The air feels charged, almost alive. The sphere is covered in micro-engravings, lines, arcs, and dots that resemble both constellations and molecular chains. A single motif repeats around the base, 4 rivers branching from a single circle. Back in the field lab, digital magnification reveals the engravings are not random etchings, but coded layers of information. The upper rings trace star positions from 26 millennia ago. The middle layers mirror the geometry of the Earth's magnetic grid, and deep beneath them, a final sequence matches the recurring linguistic pattern first. Identified by Dr. Leila Navarro, the Genesis code carbon dating of the E. Surrounding sediment suggests the chamber predates the rise of any known civilization. The sphere itself defies testing. No tool marks, no isotope drift, as if it had been formed in a pressure unknown to Earth. As the data streams in, Dr. Navarro overlays the star maps onto a global model. The lines connect the same regions that have yielded humanity's earliest fossils, trade routes, and myths. It is not proof of divine intervention nor coincidence. It is evidence of memory, a record of a planet learning itself. In conference calls that span continents, scientists debate what they are seeing. Physicists call the engravings a primitive record of astronomical cycles. Linguists see the birth of written thought. Theologians see poetry and geometry. And quietly, in the middle of it all, Dr. Adekoya realizes that each discipline is translating the same message in a different language. One evening, as the desert sky darkens, she walks back to the site alone. The sphere glows faintly in the moonlight, its surface catching reflections of the stars above. For a moment, she imagines the people who made it, early humans, gathered around fire, mapping the heavens, carving what they knew into the hardest material they could find. Not to claim ownership of the earth, but to leave a reminder for whoever came next. We began together. The next morning, the team re-examines the deepest engraving. The pattern is finally clear. It's not just astronomical. It mirrors the double helix of DNA, with small deviations that correspond to major migration events. Somehow, thousands of years before microscopes, someone encoded the rhythm of life itself into stone. When the data is released, the world responds with quiet disbelief. Headlines call it the Chamber of Light. Religions, universities, and museums each interpret it differently, yet the tone is strangely unified. For once, the debate is not over who is right, but over how something so old could speak so clearly to everyone. Weeks later, a translation team notices an overlooked inscription near the sphere's base, tiny characters rendered in an unknown script. After computer reconstruction, the phrase emerges: "All life returns to one light. It is the last key." The code isn't about a location or a people, it's about process. The rivers, the stars, the spirals, even the myths. They are all different ways of describing flow, connection, and return. Creation, migration, evolution, one continuous movement outward and back again. Documentaries frame it as the moment science and spirituality shake hands. Not to erase mystery, but to remind the world that curiosity itself may be the oldest form of faith. In the closing scenes, the camera drifts above the excavation site at dawn. The desert glows bronze. Dr. Navarro's voice reads from her journal. Perhaps the first humans didn't fear the unknown. They mapped it. Every myth was a coordinate, every prayer a signal. We were never searching for Eden. We were trying to remember how to speak to the earth again. Satellite images fade into sequences of rivers, galaxies, and the branching neurons of the human brain, all sharing the same fractal pattern. The narration slows, from dust to dust, from light to light. The story of origin was never about where we began, but how far the memory of unity can travel through time. The final shot lingers on the crystalline sphere, resting quietly in its chamber. The heartbeat-like pulse subsides. A single beam of sunlight reaches through the shaft, striking the artifact, scattering reflections across the stone walls, 4 points of light forming a perfect cross. The news of the Chamber of Light spread slowly at first, carried by scientific journals, online forums, and whispers among archaeologists. Then it ignited a global conversation. For centuries, humanity had sought origins in fragmented myths, fragmented fossils, and fragmented scripture. Now the fragments were converging, not into one definitive answer, but into a vision of connection. A reminder that across continents, across time, every civilization, every culture, every human story was linked. Universities formed collaborative programs. Anthropologists, linguists, archaeologists, and astronomers worked together to overlay maps of ancient river systems with star charts and fossil evidence. A previously invisible pattern emerged. The network of life, both biological and cultural, appeared like a web, delicate yet unbreakable, stretching across millennia. Each strand of that web carried stories, symbols, and observations encoded in material artifacts, language, and mythology. Dr. Navarro published a paper summarizing the findings. She didn't claim a religious truth, nor did she assert a singular origin in a geographic sense. Instead, she wrote about memory, how human beings, despite displacement, evolution, and time, had carried with them traces of their own shared history. The sphere, the inscriptions, the Afar stone, the Nubian pillars, all were markers of continuity, evidence that humans had always understood, even subconsciously, their interconnectedness. For Dr. Adekoya, the impact was deeply personal. She reflected on the countless expeditions, the nights in desert wind and dust, the endless debates with skeptics. And yet, as she stood in the chamber one last time, she realized the true revelation was not scientific, nor archaeological, nor even philosophical. It was emotional. Humanity had been striving to remember itself, to recognize unity and diversity through every story ever told. The world responded in small but significant ways. Schools introduced curricula connecting ancient mythologies with human migration, archaeology, and astronomy. Documentaries reached millions, not to rewrite belief systems, but to encourage reflection. Museums created immersive exhibits where visitors could walk alongside reconstructions of the Afar stone, the Nubian pillars, and the Chamber of Light, guided by projections of ancient star maps overlaid with the patterns of DNA and riverbeds. In Ethiopia, local communities embraced the discoveries as part of their living heritage. Guides showed tourists the riverbeds, telling stories of people who lived in harmony with the land thousands of years ago. In Sudan, the excavated city ruins became a center for research and education. Children played among ancient stones, learning that the world they inherited was shaped not by isolation, but by interconnection. At international conferences, the sphere became a symbol rather than a subject of debate. Presenters no longer argued over its age or origin, but over what it represented. A physical embodiment of memory, a record of humanity's earliest awareness of its own journey. Scholars described it as a cultural Rosetta Stone, not translating one language into another, but translating human experience across time. Dr. Navarro reflected on one particularly telling observation. The patterns etched in the artifacts, the rivers, the circles, the star alignments, were fractal in nature. Whether viewed from the scale of a desert, a continent, or a galaxy, the shapes repeated. The ancients had encoded in stone and clay the same patterns that occur naturally in rivers, trees, neurons, and constellations. It was as if creation itself had been observing creation, and human beings had noticed. This realization rippled beyond academia. Philosophers and writers began to explore the notion that the act of remembering might itself be humanity's defining trait. The myths, the songs, the sacred texts, even the earliest carvings, they were vessels for memory, repositories for knowledge that could survive the decay of time. And memory, in turn, connected individuals not just to their immediate community, but to generations past and future. The public reception, too, was transformative. People of different backgrounds and cultures began sharing interpretations of the artifacts online, creating forums where art, science, and spirituality intersected. For the first time, discussions about human origin were not divisive. They were unifying. Individuals marveled at the idea that humanity's story, while diverse in expression, shared a single thread: the instinct to observe, to record, to pass on understanding. A particularly striking outcome was the integration of the Chamber's lessons into creative work. Artists, writers, and musicians drew inspiration from the engravings, the geometry, and the patterns, producing pieces that blended science and myth. Visual artists recreated the fractal river networks. Musicians composed pieces that mirrored the rhythm of stellar cycles. Across disciplines, a collective narrative emerged. Humans are not isolated dots in the story of time, but nodes in a living, interwoven network. At the human level, the discoveries inspired reflection on personal responsibility. If memory, connection, and storytelling could transcend millennia, then the choices individuals made today could ripple far into the future. Communities around the world began initiatives to preserve not only physical heritage, but intangible traditions, local histories, and environmental knowledge. Awareness of interconnectedness influenced everything from urban planning to ecological conservation. In her journal, Dr. Adekoya wrote, "The Chamber of Light does not tell us where we began, nor does it claim to dictate belief. It whispers a reminder. The story of humanity is collective. Every myth, every migration, every act of creation contributes to a memory that spans continents and millennia. To honor it is to recognize our shared responsibility for one another, and for the earth that sustains us." The sphere, eventually moved to a secure research facility for preservation, continues to pulse with light-like reflections from its crystalline surface. Visitors leave with an impression not of answers, but of questions. Questions that invite reflection, collaboration, and hope. What if the myths, the texts, and the artifacts were never meant to divide humanity, but to bind it? What if the origin of all humans is not a place, but a shared memory of unity and discovery? As global attention settled into ongoing research, subtle patterns began emerging in society. Scholars reported increased collaboration across countries and cultures. Educational institutions incorporated cross-disciplinary studies that integrated archaeology, linguistics, astronomy, and philosophy. People of all ages engaged with the story not as dogma, but as an invitation to curiosity and empathy. The final image in documentaries of the Chamber of Light shows the crystalline sphere bathed in sunlight. Dust motes drift through the shaft like tiny stars. Reflections scatter across concentric stone rings, forming the fractal patterns seen throughout the artifacts. Slowly, the camera pans outward, rising over the desert dunes and tracing faint riverbeds to the horizon. A narration carries the closing message. The first humans left clues not of conquest or division, but of memory and connection. Across deserts, rivers, and stars, the story of life continues, written not in a single voice, but in many, linked across time. The Chamber of Light reminds us that the story of humanity is not about where we began, but how we remember, how we connect, and how we continue together. The resolution lingers not on revelation alone, but on inspiration. The artifacts, the star maps, the ancient rivers, and the fractal geometries serve as a mirror. Humanity has always sought meaning, always sought unity, and always recorded its journey, leaving a trail for future generations to rediscover. As the sun rises over the desert, the narration closes. We are in every story ever told, the same observers, the same recorders, and in remembering, we become what the first humans intended, witnesses to life, keepers of memory, and bearers of light. Fade to black.